Welcome to the Edinburgh Fringe. Whoever controls the podcast controls the future. Yes, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever, whenever you are, welcome to Edinburgh. The Fringe is here. We are approaching the end of the week, the big Friday, Saturday nights, when there's a big focus on ticket sales and the big shows. But with over 3,000 shows to go, if you can't make it to Big Comedian Off the Telly, who's already sold out a 200 theatre-seater space because it's an introspective moment, there's a heck of a lot of other shows to choose from as well, from new and upcoming comics to monologues and performance pieces, one-man, one-woman shows, theatre. Look, you know the drill. Pick somebody you like, introspective comedian. Pick somebody that somebody else recommends or you've heard about. Well, you've got a podcast here with quite a few names, but other options, reviews are available. Third one, choose one at random. Just walk up to a venue, go, it's 11:30, what have you got on? That'll do, let's see what that's like. That's your Fringe. Certainly it's how I've been enjoying it over the 21 years or so of this podcast, and near 30 years going to the Fringe itself, having been at university and then moving to this gorgeous city. Anyway, what do we have today? A story that has been told countless times before, but becomes more relevant every time it is told. It's 1984, and Boxtail Soup have brought their version of the classic warning to the Edinburgh Fringe. I caught up with Noel Byrne to talk about the challenges involved in bringing a classic to the stage. Boxtail Soup have found themselves as one of the leading puppetry theatrical companies coming to the Fringe over the last few years. So this is a chance for me to explore how the company came together, how it came to be known for that part of the artistic world, how they learned their skills, and how they develop as a company in such a unique space. I mean, it's not a unique space, but it's one that's not very well travelled. And with that, how can this stylised approach apply itself to George Orwell's 1984? What different approaches can be taken with puppetry? And when is the decision on who gets to be a puppet and who gets to be a human? All of that and more comes up in the interview. Joining me now, writer and performer Noel Byrne. Welcome to the show, Noel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
From Boxtail Soup, who have done many, many years at the Fringe. How many shows now?
We've done a few. Our first show was in 2013. That was our first Fringe, I think. And we've done every year since then.
Any standout memories?
I mean, that's so difficult. It all blends into one for me, to be honest, because I've been coming to the Fringe since I was 16 years old. So it really is one continuous blur, I think. I mean, I suppose your first Fringe is always sort of special, and being able to share that work for the first time and kind of feel like it was something that we could carry on with because we were a new company. So, you'd always remember that. But there's always something different and new to experience every year, every time you go.
And there are many theatre groups at the Fringe, but Boxtail Soup have their own unique take on things.
I would hope so, yeah. People who come to see the work certainly seem to feel that way. And yeah, I mean, I think that we've developed our style as we've gone year after year, as we've continued to create work, as you would expect, really. I think we've kind of honed that down and found the things that interest us about creating theatre and the things that we really enjoy. And yeah, I mean, I hope that the audience who keep coming back to see us feel the same way about it, feel that they enjoy whatever it is that we've zeroed in on.
There's a lot of puppetry involved across the spectrum of shows that you've done. Mm-hmm. Why, as a company, did you decide to go down that route?
In the first instance, it was actually accidental. When we were very first starting out, we knew that we wanted to create our own work, and we'd seen a lot of puppetry, and it was something that we'd enjoyed. I'd actually worked as what they call a skin performer as well for a special effects company. So I'd been inside some big puppets and some big costumes and stuff like that. So it was something that we'd enjoyed, and we'd seen other shows and other puppetry things, and always found it quite magical. We hadn't really considered using it to the full extent in our own work. Our first show was an adaptation of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, and I think the thing that brought it up was we talked about a character called General Tilney, who is a bit of a sort of gothic pastiche almost, and we thought that we were going to have 4 performers in the show, and we thought that maybe General Tilney could be a shadow puppet, so that he was this larger-than-life figure. As it worked out, because of circumstances and employment and people getting different jobs, we ended up with only 2 performers in the show. And the puppet idea just sort of snowballed. And we thought, well, actually, the society in Jane Austen's time, would it be interesting to kind of represent everybody as a puppet? Because it was all very performative, and there were various behaviours that you had to adhere to. So the only 2 human characters in that show are the 2 who make a connection and actually fall in love, while they're surrounded by all of these paper people.
How do you learn something like that? I mean, and in terms of sort of opening up a company to do that immediately, because, yep, you've got some FX background in there, but it's not a huge wealth of puppetry background.
No, and I mean, we had huge imposter syndrome for a very long time, I think. Sustainability is a big part of what we do, and when we started out, a lot of that was necessity as well, because we didn't have a huge amount of resources to draw on. So all of the puppets that we made in the beginning were made from things that we had lying around the house. So we used the recycling, we used old sheets, we used bed valances, we used whatever we could lay our hands on, and it was really a bit of an experiment. We really didn't know whether we were going to get away with it, I suppose. So when we did those first performances, and people really seemed to understand what it was that we were doing, what we were getting at, we were thrilled and a little bit shocked, I think. And it was probably, I mean, it's probably only within the last 3 or 4 years that we feel comfortable referring to ourselves as puppeteers, and we've learned on the job. Everything, in some ways it's been an advantage, because it's meant that we've approached things in a different way, but obviously you always feel as though there are things perhaps you should know that you don't, or there's a little bit of that imposter syndrome that creeps in.
I mean, was there any feeling that you wanted to go for any sort of education or academia while you were learning to puppetry, or did you just go, we're just going to keep our own blank bit of paper forever?
We did talk about it in the early days. For the first couple of years, we considered maybe going to study somewhere. But I think because we were successful in creating work, and we managed to keep touring it, and it was always sort of snowballing, we felt as though we were developing on the job. And because the audiences kept coming and seemed to enjoy what we were doing, we felt, that was validation enough to carry on and pursue our own practice, I guess.
Is there a secret handshake between other puppeteers to go, yeah, you're one of us now?
I don't think so. I think there's certainly an appreciation for just animating simple objects. I think there's puppetry is such a magical thing, and it doesn't matter how old you are. If you see something that works and is brought to life in the right way, it's just immediately transportive. It's absolutely amazing. Even when I see puppetry now, and everything about how this particular trick is being done, how this character is being performed, if it's done well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can see the strings, you can see how everything's being done. It's just magic. Something just comes to life. So I think there's a real appreciation of that among other puppeteers, and the little quirky things you can do to even just bring a cup and plate to life, or a hoodie or something like that. So those are nice to share.
So this year for the Fringe, you are bringing up a magical work, I suppose, if it's dark. 1984.
Mm-hmm.
Why this play? or this novel or this adapt. I'll ask about the starting point in a minute, but why 1984?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we expected it to be as relevant as it is. I mean, it's always been relevant as a story. You read it now, and it does read almost like a manual for some governments, I think, and for some officials. Some of the language that's used in it is so close to the things that you hear on the news. It is a little bit startling. So I don't think that we were aware of that really, because obviously the development process takes long enough that we weren't quite in the same situation as we are now. It had been suggested to us a couple of times. I think people who had seen our work, thought that it would work for us and it would be an interesting one for us to do. And we talked for a while about wanting to do something that was a little bit sci-fi. So we discussed various different titles, and we're always limited by work that's out of copyright if we're going to do an adaptation. And we'd read various bits of sci-fi and various bits and pieces here and there. And then a couple of years ago when we were at the Fringe, Antonia, my partner, she'd never read 1984. She started reading it in one of the bookshops there. And I think because she started having ideas about it immediately, that's always a really good sign. So then we started talking about it, and one thing led to another. And as it turns out, it feels like quite a appropriate time to be doing that show.
Just to sort of set the timescale, a couple of days ago, Stephen Colbert brought up his monologue after the Late Show being cancelled, and right at the end he dropped in the line, "We have always been at war with Oceania." It's right there in the zeitgeist this week.
It's incredible, isn't it? I don't know how it was so prescient, but it is absolutely staggering that it's so on the money.
I think you've given the game away there with Antonio, and I've already given away for my next question before, but there you go. Sometimes it happens. It sounds like the starting point has been the novel, even though there have been other tentpole versions of 1984 throughout all media.
Yeah, that's always the way for us. We always start with the novel or the kind of the original material. We've always done that with all of the adaptations we've done. We will always kind of explore around it, so we'll always read other material and other stuff by that author. And maybe, for example, for this show, we read Julia by Sandra Newman, the sort of more recent novel about the character of Julia in 1984, and you might read around it and maybe watch some films, and you go back and watch the one with John Hurt and get a sense of how the story's been treated. But we always go back to that source material, and that's where we start with when we're writing our adaptation.
How reverential can you be? I mean, and this is another way. It's like, obviously, it's not quite a sacred text. This isn't Fahrenheit 451 after all, but it has so many beats that are so well known. How do you ever want to go beyond the text, or are you just doing an abridgment to choose the ideas that you want to approach?
I think in some ways, all of these texts are sacred to people who love the book. And that's one of the things that we always try and bear in mind. When you're doing adaptation, you're working with something that some people are going to love, and some people are going to come and see your show because of that, because they know the source material and they want to see it done well. So you owe it a certain amount of respect just for that, if nothing else. Let us aside the kind of the fantastic quality of the writing itself. But having said that, we never take on a show unless we feel like we can put something of our own into it. We can kind of approach it in a way. One of the catchphrases that we tend to use on the website is that these are stories that you think you know in a way you never imagined. So we try and tell them in an interesting and new way. What that means will vary from one show to the other. And there are a few surprises in this one, for example. I don't think it's too big of a spoiler to say that we've stayed away from screens, for example, because we thought that was maybe a little done, a little obvious. So we just wanted to try and do something different.
At which point do the concerns of puppetry come in? where in the writing process, I mean, is there a point in the writing process where you go, no, maybe we're just going to do this ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it varies from show to show, and it's one of the things that we try and be diligent about. Even if the audience doesn't necessarily know the ins and outs of it, we always make sure that there is a kind of a thematic reason or an overarching reason why certain characters are puppets and certain characters are human. And there have been some shows where I think over the last couple of years we've done Casting the Runes by Emma James. And in the original version of that we did, because we revised it recently for the last couple of years, in the original version there was only one puppet, just because we felt that was right. And in the more recent version, we added a few extra puppets, and we've found a slightly different way of doing it. For 1984, it was actually a fairly easy conversation. We've certainly had more difficult ones with different adaptations, but I think with a story like this, puppetry is such a great metaphor for control and for loss of agency that it was a fairly straightforward conversation. It's not as simple as this character's a puppet and this character's a human. We mix it up, there's a few more blurred lines than that, but nonetheless, we were pretty clear on how we wanted to approach the idea.
Do you write the puppet characters differently to the actor characters?
No, we treat them exactly the same. When we're writing it, we don't consider the fact that they're a puppet. We never think about that. And I think it's better to do that and solve the problems in rehearsal and practically than it is to limit yourself and limit the writing by saying, oh, well, we can't have them do that. We can't have them say that because it's a puppet. It often leads to much more exciting things to do with the puppetry, because you'll get to a certain point and realize, you've written this moment where this character is supposed to backflip over something, and you just have to find a way to make that happen with the puppet, which is always a nice challenge.
Isn't that, though, where the inventiveness of art comes through? I mean, people always flag up the restrictions of finance, but I suppose with puppetry, you also have restriction of movement, restriction of... It's not a restriction of emotion, but it's a different way of showing emotion.
It's really just a different set of rules. There are certain things that puppets can't do, but there are certain things that puppets can do that humans could never do. So, you have a different opportunities.
What's your favourite puppet move?
Favourite puppet move?
Yeah, like dancers have a favourite dance move, and Shakespearean actors have their favourite sonnet. What's your favourite puppet move?
There's a puppet that we use for Gulliver's Travels, which is a little version of me, in fact, when he visits the land of the giants. And we do a dance with that puppet. It's all part of the story, but we do a little dance with that puppet, and being able to work with two other puppeteers, so we've got temporary rods that are attached. It's always really nice to work wordlessly, silently, just by hearing and listening. It's always nice to work with other puppeteers. We're often operating one puppet at a time, or we're often operating a puppet on our own. So when you get the opportunity to have 2, 3, 4 puppeteers working on the same character, that's always a really enjoyable experience.
You said there, 1984, more relevant than it would have been last year, the year before, but always there. Does it help bringing a recognisable property to the Fringe?
Yes, I think it definitely does. It's part of the reality of our lives as a company year round. We don't just perform at the Fringe. It's a very important part of our calendar, because it does lead to not just to building an audience there, but building an audience nationally and making connections with all of the industry people who come to the Fringe. And I think we were conscious from the very beginning as a company that if we were going to take work out and tour it, we wanted to do something interesting and original, but you have to balance that with it being commercially viable. And adaptation is a good way to do that if you have an interesting take on it, but you can make something that people are going to enjoy and recognise.
You talk about an interesting take there. I suppose on the surface, puppets doing 1984 is one of them. But could you give us just like a sort of flavour of what the deeper connection is?
I think there are certain images associated with 1984, as is so often the case with a classic text. And I think a lot of people, maybe because of some of the language using it, because of the things like comrade, associate it with communism, and you imagine a kind of concrete and the big picture of the mustachioed guy and CCTV cameras and screens and all that kind of thing. So we wanted to try and stay away from all of that stuff if we could. And I'm pretty pleased with what we've managed to do with it. It's funny that Orwell imagined this world where people were forced to have screens installed everywhere, and people couldn't get away from these screens that were observing them and surveilling them wherever they went. I think he maybe would find it kind of funny that, in actual fact, the reality of the situation is we carry those screens around with us willingly. But part of the problem with that for a modern audience is that there is nothing threatening about that. It doesn't carry the same weight as it did in Orwell's day. The idea of someone carrying a screen and being able to see you or being able to watch you doesn't mean the same thing as it did back then. So we had to try and find ways to give that same sense of just same sense of threat that maybe you wouldn't get as a modern audience if you're looking at a screen and going, well, yeah, of course, I've got a dozen of those around my house right now.
The show itself, when's it on?
The show is on at 11:25 a.m. every day at Pleasance Courtyard. And we're doing every day except the 13th.
As always, links to the box office to buy your tickets direct will be back on our website, edinburghfringe.podcastcorner.com. Noel, where can people find out more and follow Boxtail Soup online?
We're on all the usual social media, so TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. You can find us at Boxtail Soup, and that's Box, T-A-L-E, as in the story, Boxtail Soup. And our website is just boxtailsoup.co.uk.
And we'll link those back on the website as well. Noel, it's always a challenging piece of theatre to enjoy and absorb, and to bring another layer of it up to the Fringe is why the Fringe is here. I am so looking forward to it. Thanks for coming onto the show.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Boxtail Soup's Noel Byrne there, with a little look behind the scenes at 1984. Links back at our website as well to the box office and also to Boxtail Soup's website. Show itself, it takes place in Pleasance Courtyard, 11:25 a.m. through to 12:35. It's a 70-minute show, and it's a really, really deep way to start off a day at the Fringe, but that is the delight. We talked before about how many genres there are. You don't have to stick with something light and gentle to get started with and finish up with a bit of comedy. You can go wherever you like, wherever you want. That is the delight of the Fringe. As always, because we're an online thing, link, like, love, share, subscribe, leave reviews and stars in your app and all of that, etc., etc., etc. Thank you very much. It will help somebody else find a podcast that you've hopefully enjoyed. But for now, I'll catch you tomorrow. You've been listening to the Edinburgh Fringe Show, hosted by Ewan Spence, produced by the Podcast Corner for Spence Media and Radio 6 International. Listen to more from the Fringe at edinburghfringe.thepodcastcorner.com.